The Subcommittee on Energy and Environment will come to order. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the Environmental Protection Agency Budgets for Fiscal Year 2013. In front of you are the packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witness panel. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's hearing. Unfortunately, I have to begin by expressing a matter of disappointment. The President's budget request for the federal government was released more than 3 weeks ago, but NOAA has still not delivered its budget justification documents to Congress. This subcommittee oversees NOAA's $5 billion budget and has a responsibility to review and react to the details of the President's budget. In the absence of budget details, we're simply unable to provide a complete assessment of the request. Last week, the Appropriations Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, and Science had to cancel its hearing as a result of that delay. We've chosen to go forward with this hearing due to scheduling constraints, but I must impress upon you, Administrator Lubchenco, that this abdication of such a simple responsibility influences the perception on the Hill that the administration is not being a good steward of taxpayer money. One of the major themes of the President's FY13 budget request has been the need to make tough choices. Only in Washington, as we face an unprecedented fiscal train wreck and continue to be forced to borrow 40 cents on the dollar, can a requested budget increase of 3.1% for NOAA and 1.4% for EPA be characterized as making tough choices. Even within these requested increases, the administration is prioritizing its political and environmental agendas ahead of the core scientific needs of the nation. For NOAA, satellites now comprise 40% of the total budget request. This is up from 31% just 2 years ago. While the committee applauds the successful launch of the Suomi NPP satellite, we continue to have grave concerns with the current trajectory of the Joint Polar Satellite System program. Even NOAA's own optimistic schedule of a launch of the next polar satellite in the early part of 2018, and I say optimistic since it took 18 years to get the first satellite off the ground, still leaves us with an almost certain gap in data availability. The limited budget information provided to the committee thus far provides no indication that NOAA has a plan to develop a solution that ensures continual high-quality data for weather forecasting. The extreme weather events just last week and this week further highlight the importance of this data to saving lives and property. Further, the delays and cost overruns so systematic to NOAA's satellite programs is forcing significant reductions in the budget for important activities such as oceans, fisheries, and weather. Another big winner in NOAA's budget request is climate research. In the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research alone, more than $212 million is allotted for climate research, a 15% increase above last year, whereas less than $70 million is set aside for research in weather and air chemistry. Taken together with the cuts to the National Weather Service, the budget indicates the administration has prioritized understanding climate conditions decades from now over predicting weather conditions tomorrow. Given the potential for innovations in weather forecasting to greatly aid the economy and save lives and property, the continued prioritization of climate over weather is highly disappointing and should be rejected by Congress. The administration's budget request for science and technology activities at EPA is similarly concerning. In a series of hearings on EPA's research activities, this subcommittee examined in detail the line between politics and science at the agency. While Administrator Jackson stated that, quote, science is the backbone of everything we do at the EPA, it is a very weak backbone struggling to support the enormous weight of the administration's regulatory ambitions. The Office of Research and Development represents less than 7% of the $8.3 billion request for EPA. Instead of conducting fundamental environmental research, the agency sacrifices sober analysis in favor of the outcome-driven science demanded by the President's anti-energy agenda. All too often, what passes for peer review of agency science is a rubber stamp by supposedly independent scientific advisors who also happen to be recipients of EPA's largesse. The President's focus on climate change and the ongoing efforts to find a regulatory angle to restrict the shale gas revolution comes at the expense of worthwhile R&D. EPA is requesting substantial increases for these two areas, including more than $240 million for duplicative climate change activities and $14 million for work on hydraulic fracturing of questionable value. Following the sloppy and highly questionable actions of the agency in investigating water concerns in Pavilion, Wyoming and Dimock, Pennsylvania, and the inability to follow its own peer review guidelines in the endangerment finding on greenhouse gases, I have little confidence in EPA's ability to conduct trusted quality science in this area, and as such cannot support the significant expansion of hydraulic fracturing research called for in this request. I want to thank the witnesses for appearing before the subcommittee, and I look forward to a constructive discussion. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Miller for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Harris. I also want to welcome the witnesses today, Dr. Lubchenco from NOAA and later Mr. Cadelli from the EPA. I want to thank both of you for being here today. We are likely to spend much of this hearing discussing two subjects that these agencies are now tackling. First, understanding the environmental and if subcommittee hearings and hearings of this committee in this Congress are any indication, at least. First, understanding the environmental and human health effects of massive expansion in oil and gas drilling, principally fracking, and second, understanding the nature of our changing climate and what effects it will have. Those are critical research areas that EPA and NOAA are uniquely qualified to undertake, but a discussion limited to hydraulic fracturing and climate change ignores the broad scope of the scientific activities these agencies pursue and the critical role they play in our lives every day. From forecasting the weather to protecting public health by ensuring cleaner air and water, those roles are too easily disregarded and unfairly demonized at times in the fog of partisan politics. We must not lose sight of the contribution that decades of science and technology research have provided our economy and our public health. While today we see areas of agreement and disagreement on the appropriate resources and directions for NOAA and EPA, I think we should all agree that good policy begins with good science and that good science is not free. We must recognize the value of those programs and work together to protect every American's right to cleaner air and water and a healthier environment. I understand the need to set priorities in times of fiscal restraint, as we appear now to be in, and commend the administration for doing that. But there are aspects of each of the budgets that concern me. Despite the challenging economic times, it is unwise to sacrifice the services that the public relies on, such as weather forecasting and our warning capabilities. Nor should we undermine America's future by failing to invest in the next generation workforce of scientists. We can be fiscally responsible while still making the necessary investments to keep our country and our environment healthy and the American economy competitive. It is hard at times to avoid cliches in politics, but I try. There is a phrase that is widely used because it is frequently apt. We are eating our seed corn. That is my great concern about our budget for research. Dr. Lubchenco and Mr. Cadelli, as you testify today, please explain how the proposed cuts and increases will affect your agency's ability to protect the health and well-being of our citizens and communities, and how the President's request will move our nation's science enterprise in the right direction. I look forward to working with you both, with all of you, in the months ahead. I will support the agencies on a lot of things, but I think you should get your budget justification in too. And second, I understand that the Department of Commerce is now resisting documents that I'm not sure the committee still wants on the basis that they are pre-decisional. I will not support agencies in refusing to release documents based upon exceptions to the requirements of FOIA. When Congress requests, it is not pursuant to FOIA. The courts do recognize a limited pre-decisional immunity from production, but it is very limited. If there's any reason for producing it, the administration should produce it. And there's almost always a reason when Congress asks that a document that outlines how the decision made the decision they made is a sufficient basis for Congress to ask for it. So I also urge the administration, EPA, NOAA, Commerce, to release documents without regard to whether they are pre-decisional or post-decisional. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I do yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I'd like to introduce our witness for the first panel. The Honorable Jane Lubchenco is the Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration at the Department of Commerce. She's a marine ecologist and environmental scientist by training, with expertise in oceans, climate change, and interactions between the environment and human well-being. She received her MS in zoology from the University of Washington and her PhD in ecology from Harvard University. Thank you for appearing for the subcommittee today. As you should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. And I now recognize you as our witness for the panel, Dr. Lubchenco.
Chairman Harris, Ranking Member Miller, members of the committee, thank you for your leadership and your continued support of NOAA. I'd like to start by extending NOAA's condolences to the families who lost loved ones in last week's tornadoes. Our local forecasters in the affected communities know the pain and the long road to recovery these destructive storms create. They also know the resilience of these communities. As home of the National Weather Service, NOAA is proud to be the nation's first line of preparedness against severe weather. The March 2nd outbreak was classified as a major outbreak. 2012 now ranks in the top 5 years for the number of tornadoes from January 1 through March 2nd, since detailed records began in 1950. These events highlight the importance of everyone being ready for severe weather. That is why NOAA is making a weather-ready nation a top priority. Last week, our forecasters were able to give communities 3 days to prepare for Friday's storms. And as tornadoes were bearing down, life-saving warnings were issued an average of 16 minutes prior to each tornado striking. Our towns will rebuild, and NOAA's National Weather Service will continue to deliver the life-saving services our nation relies upon. I'm honored to be here today to discuss the President's FY13 budget request. Just as families and businesses have made tough choices with tighter budgets, NOAA has prioritized our activities. We propose targeted investments while looking for efficiencies in our operations and in some cases terminating or severely reducing activities. We have put forward a budget that reflects our dedication to providing some of the most critical life-saving jobs and job-supporting services that America's businesses, individuals, and communities rely upon. We sincerely apologize for the delay in sending NOAA congressional justification to Congress. Staff producing the CJ are working hard to complete the product as quickly as possible. As you know, the majority of the CJ lays out the justification for funding changes from the base. The major reason for the delay was that the FY12 spend plan was not finalized until a few days ago, which kept the base levels of many programs in flux. Furthermore, adjustments that were made as the FY12 spend plan was being finalized also led to late changes in the FY13 funding levels. The result was uncertainty surrounding many of the numbers, affecting a large portion of the CJ until very recently. We will deliver the NOAA CJ to you by March 14. We are committed to reviewing the process for the CJs to ensure timely delivery in the future. In the meantime, we hope the budget in brief that was available provided some critical information, and we're happy to provide more briefings now that more information is available. Turning to the FY13 request, our request, which totals $5.1 billion, is an increase of $153 million, 3.1% above FY12. To construct this budget, we sought administrative savings and made very tough choices to enable our top priorities. NOAA anticipates reaching our FY12 target of $68 million in administrative savings. An additional $16 million is targeted for 13. While we take significant steps to help reduce government spending, key investments are necessary to meet the growing demand for NOAA science and services. One of the greatest challenges that NOAA faces is the continuity of our satellite operations. We appreciate the broad bipartisan congressional support these programs received last year. Sustained funding for these satellites is important. The JPSS and the Joint Polar Satellite System and the Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite R-Series programs are two of our highest priorities. Together, they will inform what we need to keep people safe. We have done everything possible to contain costs in these satellite programs. Funding is critical to keep the programs on track and minimize the duration of the expected gap between the recently launched SUMI and PP satellite and JPSS. Without full funding, the risk that there would be a more significant gap increases greatly. 2011 rewrote the record book on extreme weather and provided a sobering reminder of our vulnerability. In response, the National Weather Service launched an initiative called Weather Ready Nation. The 13 budget requests $972 million to produce and deliver forecasts and services and improve the economic value of weather, water, and climate information. Our coastal communities are major contributors to the economy, and our budget supports those in numerous ways. Vibrant coastal communities depend on healthy oceans and thriving maritime commerce. NOAA's request includes $478 million for the National Ocean Service. In conclusion, I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to your questions today as well as continuing discussions as you make decisions on this very important budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I want to thank you for your testimony. The round of questionings will begin, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin that. Doctor, your testimony stated that despite the substantial increase in funding for satellites in the budget request, that we're almost certain that a gap in polar observational satellite data will occur. I understand that the GAO and the national academies actually have even been a little more pessimistic about the length of that gap. Setting aside any questions about who's to blame for it, what is NOAA doing to explore alternative means of getting that information? I mean, is there another plan to get that information in the gap?
Mr. Chairman, we don't believe there are any viable alternative options at this point, which is why we are very aggressively pursuing staying on track and on the budget that is projected. As you know, when I came into this position, there had been a considerable history of budget cost overruns and delays. We made a commitment to turn that around, have restructured this new program, JPSS, and I believe we are on track as long as we obtain the funding that we need this year and next year. And I believe that the success of the programs to date are bearing that out.
Has NOAA considered conducting an observing system simulation experiment in order to inform the development of future operating systems?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
The one. Then OSSE, OSSE. Observing. Okay. Well, we'll submit it in writing, and you can talk to staff about it then. Okay. One of the few reductions in your request is to discontinue the National Air Quality Forecasting capability, which of course forecasts ozone and particulate matter levels. And of course that capability allows EPA and local agencies to issue their air quality health alerts to the public. Now, the National Weather Service states that this discontinuation was to, quote, fund higher priority items. But the decision seems at odds with what the EPA administrator has said. Administrator Jackson last year said, quote, we're actually at a point in many areas of this country where, on a hot summer day, the best advice we can give you is don't go outside. Don't breathe the air. It might kill you. In September, Ms. Jackson stated that, quote, if we could reduce particulate matter to healthy levels, it would have the same impact as finding a cure for cancer. Obviously, it seems like the EPA thinks this might be important information. How can you explain the disparity between NOAA and EPA and the priority of developing the ozone and particulate matter level warnings?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think there's any disparity in terms of the importance of measuring particulates and ozone. As we looked at our budget and made decisions, we really focused on areas that were core to our particular mission and areas where we had the greatest immediate responsibility to the citizens of this nation. The ozone and particulate programs have been relatively small and are less core to our immediate mission than are many of our other programs.
Well, let me move on to that because you know, a lot of Americans, I think, would say, you know, forecasting the weather, National Weather Service is important, but the budget actually, a budget that increases by 3.1%, actually has a decrease in National Weather Service. How do you explain that, I mean, where do you prioritize? I mean, obviously, climate change got a large increase, climate research, weather service gets a decrease. Why?
Mr. Chairman, the ability for us to deliver quality weather forecasts and warnings depends on a variety of activities within NOAA. First and foremost, our weather satellites. You see a significant increase in our satellite programs this year, and that is due directly to the importance that those weather satellites play. Over 90% of the data that go into our numerical weather models come from satellites. The decreases that you see in the Weather Service program are ones that we believe represent mostly administrative efficiencies, where we can provide the same or better level of service at a lower price, if you will. So overall, we have put saving lives and property at very, very top level of our budget, and I think that's reflected in the combined satellite and weather service line items.
But why not, just to follow up, I mean, why not take it from climate research instead of the Weather Service? I mean, climate research gets hit Weather Service gets a hit in funding to fund satellites, but climate research doesn't. I mean, is that the priority of the administration, that climate research, again, and you've testified before, this is looking at decades in the future, is more important than looking at a week into the future. I would say some people in the Midwest might disagree with that, but
the investment in understanding how the climate system works influences directly our ability to provide outlooks, for example, with drought, severe weather, and such as heavy precipitation events, heat waves, those kinds of things. So there is a direct connection between our better understanding of how the climate system works and our ability to deliver information to help communities and people and businesses prepare even in the months to years ahead, not just decades from now.
And just very brief clarifying point, wasn't your testimony before the committee that the climate research is looking years ahead? It's not months, not weeks, not days.
Climate research is designed to help us understand how the climate system works. That helps us understand what will happen months ahead, years ahead, and decades ahead, all of those.
Thank you very much, and I recognize Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lubchenco, I also have a question about the polar orbiting satellites, the geostationary satellites, the next generation, because the INPO system was one of the most snake-bit projects the federal government has ever been involved with. This committee has had many hearings on polar orbiting satellites, and GAO has taken a great interest. And they earlier estimated what it would take to complete the JPSS system at well more, I think a couple $1 billion more than the $12.9 billion that your budget suggests will be sufficient. And lowballed estimates are a problem because it may help get programs through initially, and then it may be that Congress is reluctant to pull the plug on a program once begun, but it leads to undermining confidence by Congress and the agency. It undermines confidence by the American people that there are cost overruns. And it would be very useful to begin with a pretty realistic estimate. Do you believe, why do you believe that the program will cost less than GAO estimated, and will the requested funding level be enough to develop the instruments and to meet the scheduled launch dates?
Congressman, when I first took this position, I was told in no uncertain terms by members of Congress that the NPOST program was a national embarrassment, had been problematic for far too long, and absolutely needed to be fixed. And I took that very seriously.
Well, as you should have.
Which is what led to the significant restructuring of that program. And the creation of the Joint Polar Satellite System is a result of that. It has benefited from intense internal and external scrutiny. We had the benefit of many outside experts advising us on this, learning from the lessons of NPOS, and committing to not repeating them. In constructing our budgets, we have committed to capping the costs of JPSS at this $12.9 billion level. That will indeed entail the loss of some of the sensors that we had originally envisioned to fly on those satellites, but we are in fact committed to staying with that cap. I think that the success that we're having now with the NPP, SUMI NPP satellite, the instruments that are on it, our good partnership with NASA in that regard, and all of the activities we have engaged in with the JPSS program to date suggests that, in fact, we have turned this around. We are on track. We will be watching it very, very closely, as I'm sure you will be and should be. But I think that these satellites are too important to not be on the path to success, and we are committed to that end.
Climate research. I understand that NOAA is involved, should be involved in all aspects of climate research, observations, data management, modeling, and those various activities advance what you call the NOAA climate goal. There are other agencies that are also involved in climate research. What is the climate goal, and how does that goal benefit the mission of the agency and the needs of Americans? And is that research duplicative of what is going on at other agencies?
Thank you, sir. Good questions. Within NOAA, there are activities across many different parts of NOAA, what we call line offices, that touch on our climate goal. And so it is appropriate for us to have a mechanism of integrating across the different units within the agency. That's what the climate goal does. It pulls from the different units and has a more overarching, integrated nature. By the same token, there is a mechanism to integrate research across the different federal agencies that are engaged in climate research through the program called the U.S. Global Change Research Program. That is the mechanism by which we ensure that there is not duplication, that there is coordination, collaboration across the different agencies. So each different agency that does have some element of climate research coordinates through the Global Change Research Program. For example, there are different types of modeling efforts underway that are complementary, and this is a mechanism of keeping each other informed and making sure that we don't have duplication.
Okay. My time has expired.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's kind of an interesting distinction here that you're making with the climate and versus weather, and I'm sure there is that delineation that's made in academia and as well as in government offices. A recent Government Accountability Office report found that 40% of the weather stations used for the U.S. Historical Climatology Network do not meet NOAA's own sitting standards, which require, for example, that weather monitor stations not be located too close to paved surfaces or in areas that of course, would interfere with with a correct assessment of the temperature, etc. The report also found that NOAA does not centrally track whether or not these stations adhere to the actual standards, nor does it have an agency-wide policy regarding these stations. Now, so I guess it's saying that you have 40% of the weather stations used for this U.S. Historical Climatology Network don't meet NOAA's own standards. Is that correct?
Congressman, I don't know the actual figure. I can tell you that through time, many stations that were originally put in one place, the circumstances around them have changed, and that when we collate all that information, we take that into account and often make adjustments accordingly. We're in the process of sort of looking across all of those weather stations to make sure that they give us the best kind of information, and we're
well, so it's pretty hard to adjust something if you don't know what the real recording is. I mean, it's one thing to say you adjust by some average of what's happened in the past. Well, that doesn't count if you think there's changes going on. How much of that? Now, I understand that there's a request for $28 million to increase climate research. Does any of that money, that the $28 million requested, would go to perfecting these stations so you'll know how to judge the climate by accurate weather assessments?
Congressman, there are multiple different ways that we take data about temperatures, for example, and those ground stations are one of them. They are complemented by a number of other mechanisms that overlap. So we have satellite information, we have ground-based information, we have tall towers, we have buoys, and so our information about changes does not rely on any one type of network. It relies on the sum total of those. The climate research program that's in our budget is focused on not the monitoring per se, but understanding the mechanisms that, how the Earth system works. What's the role of aerosols? What is the carbon cycle like? What is the role of black carbon, for example?
Well, if you have a lot of, but if you have 40% of the stations not meeting the standards, certainly seems to me that before you want to go into all these other calculations, that you're going to want to fix that problem. And I guess what I'm hearing is, no, you're not going to go after those stations. And that money that's been requested to increase climate research will have to just work around those figures that may or may not be accurate.
Congressman, let me get back to you with respect to that figure and what we're doing to address that need, because
Okay,
I'd like to give you accurate information on
it. It is the government accounting office's
I understand.
statistics. And let me just note, in Orange County, where I come from, I grew up there as a boy, and my dad was a Marine, and we were at El Toro, and all around us were orange groves as far as you could see, and there were some weather stations there, and I will tell you right now, to think that those weather stations, it's a totally different world now where those weather stations are located. They're located in a bunch of concrete and buildings, and it's a totally different environment. So I think that when we're trying to find out what's accurate in terms of what those instruments are recording, we do have to take into consideration those type of changes, and it doesn't look like we've paid enough attention to that. But thank you very much. I'll be hopefully getting maybe a couple paragraphs back from you on how we're handling that.
I can tell you that we are, in fact, aware of the changes in many of these places, and in some areas we are creating new stations and having, in areas that are not likely to change through time, such as you mentioned. But what the number is and exactly the rate at which we're fixing them, I'm happy to get back to you on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to be here. Some of my questions have already been asked, but I did share with our witness a copy of an editorial that appeared in the San Jose Mercury News a couple of weeks ago relating to the tsunami alerts and the proposed $4.6 million reduction that affects the early warning system. I'd like to note that San Jose, which is within my congressional district, is not on the coast. And we would not be impacted by a tsunami in any way. Actually, we've even done the modeling. Even on the bay, there's no way that a tsunami could impact us according to the computer modeling. So this is not from a parochial point of view. But I do have a concern. I read the analysis that a degradation of this system, which I think inevitably will result. If we are not able to repair these buoys, some will go dark and we will not be able to reach them without the funding, that this could have a public safety impact. And obviously you have constraints that were placed upon you. We recognize that. But I'm concerned as we think about the tsunami, the devastating tsunami that hit Japan, certainly the possibility of a devastating impact somewhere along the West Coast, whether it's Washington or L.A., needs to be considered. And I'm wondering if this is really something that we want to stick with in terms of reduction. Could you address this subject at all?
Certainly, and thanks for the question, Congresswoman. Tsunamis are very, very serious, obviously, and we take our responsibility to warn our citizens very, very seriously. We saw with both the Chile and then the Japanese tsunami how devastating they can be. Our tsunami warning system was active in both of those instances and, in fact, prevented considerable damage that might otherwise have occurred. For example, both places along the West Coast, Crescent City, for example, but also in the Hawaiian Islands and other Pacific places, territories.
Santa Cruz?
And Santa Cruz, absolutely. Santa Cruz was seriously affected. Our warning program before this year had benefit of both appropriated funds as well as funds from the 2005 Deficit Reduction Act. And this year, that act expires. We will no longer have funds from the WARN Act to help supplement our tsunami programs, which is why you see a reduction in this year's program compared to last year. Nonetheless, we will be able to continue to have two very active tsunami warning centers in Alaska and in Hawaii. The DART buoy systems that give us very important information as the tsunami is moving across the Pacific will remain in place. The decreased funds mean that we will be unable to go out and fix those DART buoys when they become disabled as frequently as we would like to, or that as frequently as we have to date. So the system will still be up there. We just are not able to maintain it at the pace that would be necessary.
May I ask you a question? Because oftentimes we think about, the west coast of the United States as being the recipient of the tsunami from an earthquake in Asia, but certainly there is the potential of a very large earthquake, certainly in along the state of Washington, given historic events, and so actually the Hawaiian Islands could be at risk from, as well as the coasts along the west. Have we thought about the impact of letting these buoys go dark from that kind of an event?
Absolutely. The DART buoy system was designed to function regardless of where in the Pacific Rim the earthquake was happening. And you're right to focus on Washington, but Oregon as well,
right,
as places where there, in fact, may be an event. The DART buoys do not enable those warnings to happen. When there is a seismic event, that information is received immediately by our tsunami warning centers, and they send out a model.
If I may, I think I misspoke. I'm talking about the buoys that aren't working and can't be repaired in a timely fashion.
The warnings don't depend on those buoys.
Okay.
The warnings happen first, and we are still able to do those. And then the buoy picks up the tsunami as it's moving across the ocean, and that enables us to fine-tune the warnings. So if there is a buoy that is out, we will still have a general warning. It won't be as specific as might be useful, but it's not as if we won't have any warning system at all. I agree it would be nice to have all those buoys up and running. We just don't have the money.
I would ask unanimous consent to put the editorial in the record, and just note that I understand you're constrained, but it seems to me not maybe the best place to economize. And if you overwarn, then people don't take it as seriously. And we've seen that in California, where people show up to look. And, that's, if it were a big event, that would not be a smart thing. If it's targeted, people take it more seriously. I know my time is up.
Without objection.
Thank you very much.
We'll include that in the record. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Luchenko, I want to thank you for your testimony and also for recognizing the disaster that occurred last week in the Midwest. I know a lot of families are going to be grieving a long time about that. Could you elaborate on the importance of the Weather Ready Nation initiative? Give me a little specific here. How is the money going to be used to help warn people of these events?
Congressman, we've invested a significant amount of research over the years in doing better and better at making more and more accurate forecasts with longer lead times, for example, and we have made some very significant strides in that direction. We will continue to do that, as well as have the satellites that give us the basic information that allow much of that to happen. However, many of our warnings often happen and people don't necessarily know what to do, or they don't know how to interpret the information. And so the Weather Ready Nation is an initiative to work with local communities, with emergency managers, with social scientists, with others, to help better understand what people hear when they hear a warning, and if they are hearing what we think we're trying to tell them, and if they know what to do to take cover to be safe. So it is acknowledging the very real human dimension in responding to a weather disaster warning. So we will, again, on parallel tracks, make sure that our satellites are on track to give us the basic information, have our weather forecast disaster warnings as accurate and as good as they can be, but also pay attention to increasing the ability of individuals, community leaders, emergency managers in responding appropriately when there is something bad coming.
Thank you. As a mathematician, I'm strongly in favor of, or strongly understand the importance of STEM education, and I see there's a reduction in funding for the Office of Education. How do you feel that's going to affect the training of a generation of scientists or potential scientists?
Congressman, it's one of the most painful parts of this budget for me this year. STEM education is vitally important, and the role that NOAA's education programs have played, I think, has been outstanding. We simply did not have enough funds to do everything, and made saving lives and property and other, managing fisheries, other really important things, the highest priorities. And what that meant is that there are some very important things we are not able to do, and it's very, very painful for me.
I understand. Another subject that I have a personal interest in from my past life is wind energy. I spent a career there, and I see you have $855,000 in the budget for wind boundary research, and that's going to help the industry maybe in some day. Could you tell me a little bit about that program and what exactly are they planning to do with that money?
I can give you a high-level description of it, and if you want more detail, I'm happy to provide that as well, but as a follow-up. Much of the challenge is in understanding what's happening at the scale, for example, of where at the level where the turbines are. And understanding better the boundary layer conditions and what is happening at different altitudes above the ground and how that changes when you're on a ridgetop or a valley is part of the research that is anticipated in this area. So it's understanding better what are the conditions that result in different patterns of wind, and to what extent we can predict under certain circumstances what the patterns will be under different circumstances.
So you'd be looking at the shear effects.
Yes, exactly.
And there's there's a couple of ways to do that. One is to try and map it out by location, and other is to try to understand the sort of climate, the sort of atmospheric effects that are happening due to climate situations. Are you focusing on one of those two or both?
It's a combination of those, but I can't tell you precisely what. We know that any particular place is not static through time. There are very different conditions if it's an El Nino versus a La Nina year. It depends on where the jet stream is. It depends on all sorts of other kinds of things. And having a better understanding of what are the circumstances that result in a particular pattern of winds is where we're trying to be.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Lubchenco, thank you for joining us today and for your testimony. The proposed budget for the National Weather Service has several reductions that are of real concern. This committee has opposed past attempts to eliminate the wind profiler network. I understand the data from this network are utilized for forecasting tornadoes. We are experiencing an increase in tornado outbreaks. In fact, we witnessed just recently what happened in Tornado Valley, as it's often referenced, and I saw unusual weather elements this past summer, late summer, in my own district in the 21st in New York, which included a tornado in my hometown area. Why is the administration proposing to eliminate this network?
Congressman, it's my understanding that we believe that we can get similar information through other mechanisms, and that eliminating these profilers will not impair our ability to forecast the tornadoes.
It may not limit the ability, but are we likely to experience degraded forecast accuracy?
I don't believe so. Part of what we're doing is focusing on converting our Doppler radar systems into what's called dual polarization radar. And that is giving us very good ability to have more precise information about conditions conducive to tornado formation.
I'm also concerned about the proposal to eliminate the information technology officers at each weather forecast office. My understanding is that these professionals serve as both meteorologists and IT specialists, and that many forecast offices develop specialized programs tailored to local conditions to improve their forecasting. How is a central system going to do this effectively?
We believe that we've had significant improvements in IT technology that will enable us to reduce the number of these IT positions and to fulfill the activities that they supply more regionally as opposed to in individual stations. And we believe we can do that without any significant degradation of the services provided.
So has this concept been tested, or are we simply doing the experiment and the implementation simultaneously?
It's my understanding that it's comparable to an analogous situation that happened earlier on with the Weather Service. That was a result, again, of technology enabling more effective provision of service, but at a lower cost. So we're actually learning from that experience and folding that into this design.
You know, this is a public safety issue, in my opinion, and your own agency's press release indicated we had another record year for weather-based natural disasters. You made mention of it today in your testimony. So beyond the IT abilities, are there other bits of rationale for this cut?
We take the public safety issues extremely seriously. That's really the highest priority that we have for the Weather Service. And we believe that we can achieve administrative efficiencies with this proposal with no threat to public safety, no degradation of the services that are provided. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this.
Mm-hmm. And also, Dr. Lubchenco, does the request for fiscal year 2013 include funding for the Integrated Water Resources Science and Services Initiative that NOAA is working on with the Army Corps and USGS?
Congressman, I don't have that number on the top of my head. I'm happy to get it and get back to you on that. You're right, that IRIS program, that is a joint one, is very important to us. It's at a small scale. We think there are a lot of efficiencies in combining with the other agencies, as you and I have discussed. But I don't remember exactly what's in the budget for that, but I'll get back to you on that.
Thank you. And as I stated, you know, my district has experienced a lot of impacts from Mother Nature this past summer and fall, and including terrible flooding problems last year. And I believe that this program would be very helpful in addressing water resource issues, which have got to be a primary focus, I believe, from the federal perspective.
I agree.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Dr. Luchenko, I want to thank you very much for your testimony, the members for their questions. I want to again thank you for your patience waiting while we came back from voting. The members of the committee may have additional questions for you, and we ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments from members. We are looking for those budget justifications, so don't forget us on that. The witness is excused, and we'll move to our second panel with Mr. Lech Kadeli. Thank you very much for your patience. Again, we apologize for the delay while we were voting. I want to welcome Mr. Kadeli, who is the Acting Assistant Administrator from the Office of Research and Development at the EPA. He has over 29 years of management experience in both government and the private sector. He joined EPA's Office of Research and Development in 1993 to serve as Chief of Resource Planning and Program Coordination, and in 1998 served as the Acting Deputy Director of ORD's National Exposure Research Laboratory in North Carolina. He previously served as the Acting Assistant Administrator for the Office of Research and Development from January through December of 2009. As our witness should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. And I now recognize you for your testimony, Mr. Kadeli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Harris, Ranking Member Miller, and the other members of the subcommittee. My name is Lech Kadeli, and I am the Acting Assistant Administrator for EPA's Office of Research and Development, and it's my pleasure to be before the committee to present the President's 2013 request for our budget. The 2013 research budget demonstrates EPA's commitment to providing the best science and technology for its core mission of protecting human health and the environment for American families, while recognizing the challenging realities of this current climate. The FY13 budget is the result of EPA's ongoing efforts to carefully consider potential efficiencies in a responsible manner, while supporting innovative approaches that are essential to understanding and addressing environmental challenges and protecting human health. It has taken a lot of hard work and difficult choices to reach this balanced approach, and while we had to make sacrifices, we have maintained our commitment to the priorities of this agency and ensuring the protections the American people expect and deserve. ORD conducts intramural and extramural research across a broad spectrum of disciplines necessary to support the mission of EPA. In addition to the science that we have traditionally pursued, we are investing in research on innovative approaches and technologies, along with promoting synergies between the environment and public health protection in a context that reflects broader community interests and needs. I'd like to highlight a few examples of the innovative solutions that we are pursuing and that I believe would be of interest to the committee. First, EPA is collaborating with the National Institutes of Health and the Food and Drug Administration to bring complementary expertise together to develop faster predictions of how chemicals could impact human health and the environment. The intergovernmental partnership, called TOX21, is using robotically enabled high-speed screening to test the potential toxicity of 10,000 different chemicals. This will help us more effectively prioritize chemicals for in-depth testing. Over time, will reduce animal usage in testing and reduce the cost, and most importantly, will provide data that will enable us to better predict whether a chemical exposure triggers changes that increase the potential for human health or environmental impacts. Secondly, we are collaborating with 5 large U.S. cities, Cincinnati, Dallas, New York, Philadelphia, and San Francisco, to investigate solutions to security issues at water utilities. These cities are evaluating software developed by the Office of Research and Development, which is a key component of a contamination warning system that rapidly detects hazardous contaminants in drinking water systems and is a critical technology for the detection of terrorist attacks on drinking water systems. EPA is also in collaborative efforts with municipalities to improve and achieve more resilient stormwater management approaches by sustainably addressing stormwater and septic runoff overflows. At a time where we face critical challenges in maintaining and upgrading our existing water and wastewater infrastructure, we need resilient and affordable solutions that meet many objectives at once. For example, we are supporting research and implementation of green infrastructure approaches which provide diverse economic, water quality, and community benefits. EPA's 2013 budget request proposes $807 million for the Science and Technology account. This request includes $576 million for research, including $81 million in research grants and fellowships that will be awarded to scientists and universities throughout the country to conduct targeted research as part of the Science to Achieve Results program. Building upon ongoing research and collaborating with the Department of Energy and the U.S. Geological Survey, a total of $14 million is being requested to increase our understanding of the potential impacts of hydraulic fracturing on air quality, water quality, and ecosystems. $6 million of the $14 million requested is necessary to complete the commitment to deliver on the FY13 report on the potential impacts of hydraulic fracturing on drinking water resources. The report will be peer-reviewed by the experts and a range of stakeholders. In conclusion, we have a strong tradition of scientific excellence at EPA with this budget, which this budget builds upon. I look forward to working with the committee to address current and emerging environmental problems and seek innovative solutions that will help our agency protect the environment and human health. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee.
Thank you very much. I thank you for your testimony. Reminding members the committee rules limited questioning to 5 minutes. The chair will at this point open the round of questions. I recognize myself for the first 5 minutes. Mr. Cadelli, 2 weeks ago the President gave a speech on gas prices, certainly foremost on a lot of American minds, in which he stated, quote, "I have directed my administration to look for every single area where we can make an impact and help consumers in the months ahead." My first question to you is, do you as one of the leaders in an area of the administration, do you know when you're expected to report back to the President? Was there a report date that the President suggested or is passed down through the administration? I mean, he said he wants to look in every single area in the months ahead. Is there a report date for this where you can help lower gas prices or make suggestions?
Congressman, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to respond for the record on that. I don't have the information on that.
Thank you very much. Do you know if the EPA has considered, in that in mind, do you know if the EPA has considered abandoning the Tier 3 rulemaking or greenhouse gas regulations for refining, both of which are entirely optional policies that are guaranteed to raise gasoline prices even higher than they are? I mean, is there any move afoot at the EPA to actually do what the President said in the speech?
Again, I think I'll need to provide that response for the record. I'll go back to my colleague, the AA for the Office of Air and Radiation, and get a response.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that and would love to know what that deadline is. Now, last week, Administrator Jackson claimed that the $45 million multi-agency study, which I think you alluded to in your testimony, of air, ecosystem, and water quality effects of hydraulic fracturing, quote, really isn't an expansion of the congressionally mandated study. I mean, that's what your administrator said. It really isn't an expansion. But the language in the FY 2010 appropriations report was pretty clear. It urged the agency to carry out a study of the relationship between hydraulic fracturing and drinking water. Now, so what's the origin of the $45 million effort, which by your own testimony includes things like air quality, That wasn't part of, and I won't use the word mandate because, of course, you know, the budget language in 2012 was no mandate. You know, if the instead of asking for that, you know, 2% increase, and I'll just, you know, make a comment, you know, you use the word make sacrifices. Most American families think making sacrifices mean you do more with less, not more with more. A budget increase is a budget increase. American families don't think of sacrifices as the government coming back and saying, give us more money. That's our sacrifice. So the agency doesn't have to do this study. There's no mandate. It not only took the original study, now it's expanded the study and coming back for even more money. So can you, you know, walk us through the origin of why this is now a $45 million effort that has expanded well beyond what even the non-mandatory language in the FY10 budget has called for?
Mr. Chairman, I think we all recognize the importance of this resource for this country, whether from a national security standpoint, whether from an environmental standpoint, whether from an economic standpoint. I myself have traveled to parts of this country, whether eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, New York, and other parts of the country that have been hit very hard with regards to the economic challenges. So clearly this offers a lot of opportunity for people in these parts of the country, but also offers opportunity for us to address a real need on the energy side of the equation. When we started down the path of looking at what are some of the questions and uncertainties around hydrofracking, it was done with the encouragement of Congress. And I recognize report language is perceived in various ways depending on where you sit. But clearly there are a lot of questions and have been a lot of questions. And as part of our commitment to, and the President himself has said, members of the industry have said, members of Congress and others have said that it's important to do this right. And I think there are a lot of questions out there that it would be good to bring a lesser degree of uncertainty to addressing those questions. So that's our intent with the study. That's our intent as we look at a number of questions around not just the drinking water issues, but the water quality issues and potentially air issues. I would also add that there have been concerns raised, and I think at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to the public, to the American people, to address those concerns with the facts as opposed to what sometimes is a lot of energy and passion and emotion around some of these issues.
Sure. No, I couldn't agree more. Again, so I take it that you've agreed, I guess, with my two main points. One is it's not a mandate. Originally, it's not a mandate study because perception aside, we know that budget language is not law. We know it's not binding. We know it doesn't require an appropriation, much less an expenditure. And second of all, that this really is an expansion, and that the expansion is taken not at Congress's determination, but internally in the EPA. Someone at the EPA has decided that we're just going to expand the scope of this. And we're just going to increase our budget. We're going to make these sacrifices, again, to the American people watching, American people hearing. This is what Washington thinks of as a sacrifice. Not what you think of as a sacrifice in your home. They think of a sacrifice as increasing in your budget. That's not what most Americans think. Anyway, I would recognize the ranking member, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Cadelli. This committee has been interested, and I've been interested personally, in the IRIS program for some time. It is perhaps not the embarrassment of the imposed satellite system, but it has not been one of our government's more successful programs, and it appears in part to be because of an intentional effort to keep it from doing its job, to hobble it in its mission. We obviously need a list, a reliable assessment of the public health effects of exposure to various chemicals, and the IRIS system was producing 2 assessments a year when 600 new chemicals are coming on the market every year. And I have been skeptical of some of the calls for more analysis, more review of the reviews as an intentional effort to impose paralysis by analysis. And the program has been entirely too easily influenced in the past. I know that this administration is trying to improve upon that by the industries that manufacture chemicals and by the industries that use chemicals and by the agencies of the government that use chemicals. But GAO and the national academies have also criticized the IRS program for not having rigorous peer reviews and have suggested reforms. Your budget proposal does shift resources to the EPA Science Advisory Board for additional IRS assessment reviews. How will that money be used? How will you use that money? Will there be rigorous peer reviews as GAO and national academies have suggested?
Congressman, as a science organization, one of the important ways that we ensure the work we do is of the highest quality and meets the standards that is expected by the President and by the Administrator is we invite independent peer review of the work that we're doing. And this is not just unique to our agency, but it's typical of the scientific culture. It's not only how we get our work done, but how we ensure that the American public are getting the best possible work done. I must say there are times where we have enjoyed the feedback that we've gotten from these independent scientists, and some of the feedback has been challenging. The National Academy, in their review of our formaldehyde assessment, had a number of observations that related to that particular assessment, but we've recognized that the importance of taking that feedback and enhancing the assessments that we do as a result. I will say the focus of their comments with regards to that particular assessment, particularly as we try to address them in the short term, had to do with the transparency of the data as far as how we captured them in charts, how we captured them in graphs as opposed to being lost in the text, bringing clarity to the important studies that were driving some of the conclusions that were made. So let me end by saying peer review is important. I actually think that what we do with peer review is of the highest standards. But I also continue to welcome the type of feedback that we get, which is a normal part of our process to ensure that we are providing quality products.
You earlier in your prepared testimony, you spoke of the Tox 21 system. You're working with NIH and FDA on to develop a robotic high-speed toxicity testing screening project for 10,000 different chemicals. Can that Tox 21 high-speed testing capability help the assessment of chemicals? I'm worried about the lack of productivity by the IRIS program with completing so few assessments. I mean, it'd be great to produce a perfect assessment, but if there's 600 chemicals coming on the market and getting into widespread use and people are being exposed to those chemicals and we're only producing 2 assessments a year, even if they're perfect assessments, there's a problem there. Can the Tox 21 system be used within the IRIS program, and are some of the chemicals being assessed both by IRS and by Tox 21?
This is one of the exciting areas of work going on in ORD, and as we collaborate with other federal agencies, Congressman. Obviously, we have a challenge if we're doing assessments on a chemical-by-chemical basis, which we are doing. The National Academies did a study a few years ago that was titled Toxicology for the 21st Century, where they pointed to a number of advancements that have come about in a number of other industries, including the pharmaceutical industries, that provide opportunities for us to apply the lessons learned, the technologies, the incredible increases in computational powers to some of these questions. We've made significant strides, and I would offer a briefing to the committee because of the opportunities that this offers in addressing some of the challenges that we've had historically with the IRIS program and the incredible number of chemicals that the industry continues to develop as part of commerce.
Thank you very much. Recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it behooves all of us when we discuss the EPA and other endeavors of government that combine both government and science, that President Eisenhower warned us, very dramatically warned us, yes, of a military-industrial complex, but most of us have forgotten the first warning that he gave right before he warned us of the military-industrial complex. With equal seriousness, President Eisenhower warned us against an unholy alliance between science and government, in which science would be mobilized to achieve political ends and thus actually compromise the standards of scientists and compromise the well-being of the American people. We might go back and look at that State of the Union, or it wasn't State of the Union, it was a good farewell address. And I think that nowhere is that more apparent than perhaps in some of the things that we've been worrying about with the EPA lately. And this whole hydrofracking issue is very much of a concern, because we realize that the initiative that the EPA is now operating on was not something that actually came internally from the EPA, but correct me if I'm wrong, but instead Congress, I think it was at a time when another party may have dominated the House, tasked the EPA to move forward on this. And perhaps this is the unholy relationship that Eisenhower was warning us against, because what we have now is clearly an initiative that you're moving forward with that seems to be totally politicized. And when someone comes before us, and basically when we've analyzed what you and others from the EPA have come here to tell us, Mr. Chairman, it always seems that they're basically saying, we're looking for something that we can grab onto with hydraulic fracturing. We're looking for that. We're seeking it out. And just the chairman's answers to the chairman's questions again verified that for me, that what we have here is there's no specific evidence that has led to the type of expenditure of limited tax dollars for this project, but instead the EPA is going out because it has been tasked, I think, politically to achieve this rather than scientifically. And your answer to the chairman's question did not undo that fear that I had of what was really going on here. To put it bluntly, I think for political purposes, the EPA has been targeted, or is targeting, and has been directed to target hydraulic fracturing to put a stop to it, because there is a radical element in the environmental community that does not want us to have any more gas or oil energy in this country, because they believe that oil and gas creates a carbon footprint which is changing the climate, and so they're going to save the world by preventing America from having any more oil and gas, and the EPA is going to be the vehicle in which they're going to prevent that scenario. So I just wanted to make sure that was on the record. Now I'd like to ask you specifically this question. Your scientific integrity policy applies to all grantees, the EPA's scientific integrity policy. Peter Glick of the Pacific Institute in California recently admitted that he had falsely impersonated a board member of the Heartland Institute in order to steal budget documents from that institute. Now, I understand that while this individual served as president of the Pacific Institute, that organization received nearly $500,000 in grants from the EPA. How does the new scientific integrity policy address the circumstances associated with Dr. Glick? Does any policy limit any future grants to Glick or to any institute that he is involved in providing leadership?
Congressman, I'm not as familiar with the circumstances of the grants, the type of grants, et cetera. I think this is one where I'll need to provide you a response for the record so I have all the facts correct.
Well, just for the record, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that this breach of professionalism on the part of Peter Glick and the Pacific Institute does not just it's not just swept under the rug like so many of these other violations that we've seen. Quite frankly, and I'm sorry for this is a political thing. My observation is anytime a Republican does anything like this, they all of a sudden there's an uproar. But you got you can have all kinds of emails between people talking about hiding the real facts and trying to prevent other people from actually publishing their findings scientifically, which of course violates every scientific principle, and they just get away with it. But I think it's time for us to quit ignoring these violations by radical environmentalists.
Congressman, if you have any specific details, that would be helpful as I go back, sir.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony there, my colleague from California. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that whether the majority party likes it or not, there's a growing public apprehension and alarm with potential negative impacts of hydraulic fracturing. I hear about it all the time. But regardless of whether the alarm is justified or not, the best way to proceed in this situation is to improve transparency, which is what my opinion about this budget is trying to achieve. Let the scientists do their job, and will most likely benefit both in terms of helping to reduce the public fear and developing additional technology that will improve the hydraulic fracturing itself, which everybody wants to see move forward. But on to the witness. Mr. Cadelli, I see that there's an estuarine ecosystems component of the budget. Are you familiar with that?
Our communities program has a significant ecosystems research component, and a portion of that addresses various types of waterways, yes.
This is important to me because I have the Delta is in my district. And is there any amount that's dedicated to that particular ecosystem?
Sir, I probably would want to get back to you for the record, just so I get that information correctly. I am not aware of that, but I can't say for certain. So let me respond to your question for the record.
Okay, I'd like to know that because there's a lot rides on what understanding there is of water shipments from that particular estuary. So I'd appreciate your detailed response on that.
Yes, sir.
You clearly outlined your efforts to improve efficiency in this country, which efficiency is the low-hanging fruit in terms of energy usage. For every dollar that we spend in increasing efficiency, we get a much better rate of return. Could you elaborate a little bit on what the department's going to be doing in that regard?
Well, the efficiency that I was speaking to with regards to our request had to do with how we do some of our work. So, for example, I shared what we were doing with the program called TOX 21, allowing us to take advantage of computational power of robotics that has significantly enhanced the throughput of the number of chemicals that we can run through these many tests and has significantly reduce the cost associated with them. And this is one of those programs, sir, that as you look for places, and I must say, when I visit where we have laboratories and I talk to people, I sometimes introduce myself as being from Washington and being there to help. I suspect you all can understand that sometimes that always doesn't get a welcome response. But it allows me to talk about the many good things that are going on that their tax dollars are paying for. And this TOX 21 program is one of those places where, as a result of our work with other federal agencies and in industry, there are some significant enhancements that are being made that are going to benefit our ability to understand potential impacts and effects of chemicals. So significant reductions in costs, significant gains in numbers of chemicals that we can run through a large suite of tests quickly.
Have you been successful so far?
Actually, very successful, and there have been a number of articles on the work, journal articles that have been in the peer review press, and there's more to come, sir.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And Mr. Cadeli, thank you for being here. Last I remembered, basic biology, chemistry, and science said that my body depends on oxygen to survive, as well as being able to get that even through the composition of H2O. It's nicer when there's no other chemicals or elements that are associated with H2O when you start talking about being able to bring that into the body. And I think this notion of when it became cool not to have clean air or clean water, I just don't understand where that came from, or quite honestly, why we fight about that here. Those are basic staples that we should be looking at protecting, while at the same time we can still have a strong economy. So I very much appreciate the R&D aspects of what your responsibilities entail with making sure that we still have access to that important quality when I talk about H2O. With that being said, Mr. Cadeli, you mentioned in your written testimony that the Office of Research and Development has organized a transdisciplinary program around safe and sustainable water resource research. As you know, ensuring the availability of water in the Southwest is challenging, especially in states like New Mexico that experience drought. Water resources become scarce, and we have impending problems inherently related to that. In my district, tribal communities continue to struggle for access to clean drinking water, and rural communities face challenges in developing wastewater treatment infrastructure. Can you elaborate a bit on drinking water technologies that you are establishing at ORD and how they might provide safe drinking water to our most rural communities?
Yes, sir. One of the areas of cooperation that is springing out of discussions that we've had with the academic community, with the business community, and with state and local government officials, and also the federal sector. There's a cluster of activity that is happening around our laboratory in Cincinnati, and it involves Cincinnati, Kentucky, and northern Kentucky and southern Indiana. Some of the work that they're doing, for example, is looking at some of the drinking water technologies that can be used for small water systems. And a particular aspect that they're trying to address is energy consumption. Our drinking water system and our in cleaning drinking water, there's a significant investment of energy that is necessary to do that process. So they are looking at the application of various approaches and technology that can be applied with significant reductions in technology, in energy use, with a particular focus on applications towards small systems. Clearly, large cities and jurisdictions have a larger tax base to pay for these enhancements, and one of the areas that we clearly have heard from a number of places is the importance of providing innovative approaches to help address the needs of smaller communities, of rural communities, et cetera.
I appreciate that, Mr. Cadeli. There was a project in my district where they asked students where water came from. And most of the students drew pictures of water faucets or hoses and where that water would come out with the wells and whatnot. There was a group of Navajo students that drew pictures of pickup trucks with water tanks in the back, pictures of their grandparents or their parents carrying water in buckets to their homes. And with the deteriorating system that we have around the country, it's important that we have places like that right here in America, right here in our backyard, that we need to make sure that we can never forget about. Related to that, as we talk about areas where there maybe is some infrastructure as well, with the drought that we're experiencing in parts of the country, crumbling infrastructure, I'm worried that the intersection of these two problems is a pending catastrophe. What kind of research does EPA conduct to deal with critical issues as we talk about crumbling infrastructure as well as drought?
Well, this is an area where we've seen some significant strides made in leveraging the ecosystems to do the job one of the jobs that they were created to do. I can remember visiting a member of Congress in their district, and they proceeded to take about 10 minutes to educate me on the challenges of cities, particularly in dealing with wet water flows and combined sewer overflows, and the need to make significant great infrastructure investments. So after about 10 minutes of greatly impassioned comments directed towards me as a representative of the federal government at the time, it actually provided me a great opportunity to talk about some of the green infrastructure work that we were doing that provides lower cost approaches to achieve some of the same effects. And there are also additional ecosystems benefits that occur as a result of taking these types of approaches. But this is one of those places where science and research is playing a significant role so that decision makers have the information necessary to make decisions on the types of approaches and the more economic and beneficial approaches that can be taken, complementing the gray infrastructure types of investments that need to be made too.
Thank you very much. And I just have a couple of very brief questions, and I'll yield an equal amount of time to the ranking member as designee. Mr. Cadelli, Dr. Anastas, when he testified here, said that when you're going forward with the hydrofracturing study, that in fact interested parties would be allowed to accompany at the testing of the sites and actually take samples, shadow sampling. But my understanding is since then the EPA may have reversed that position. Obviously, reproducibility and transparency is very important. Do you have an objection to that being done while you're undertaking that study?
Congressman, to the best of my knowledge, nothing has changed as far as our collaboration with the companies who are part of this study. So I'm not aware of any changes, but I will go back and ask that question and provide a further response for the record.
Thank you very much. Now, and just as kind of a comment, maybe a question to you, is you suggested, well, there are concerns about hydrofracturing, and gee, what could the agency do except study it? Why couldn't you have gone out and said, there are 1.2 million applications of hydrofracturing. The only thing it seemed to have done is to halve the price of natural gas. Well, of course, the price of gas has doubled under this administration. The price of natural gas is now 1/2 of what it is, and it seems to be safe. Wouldn't that be reason to say, to reassure the American public that actually, it's been done 1.2 million times and seems like it's pretty safe, instead of kind of setting up what could be characterized as fear-mongering to some extent? Wouldn't that have been a reasonable alternative for a scientific agency to retrospectively say, 1.2 million, kind of safe?
Well, sir, we're careful to make definitive statements until we have the information that allows us to make those statements. Again, I will say what I said earlier, which is the President, those in industry, those here in Congress have. I think there's a place of agreement. This is an important resource. We just want to make sure that it's done right. And at the end of the day, I think that's in everybody's interest, sir.
And 1.2 million, again, 1.2 million seems like it's being done right. Anyway, I'll yield 2 minutes to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There has been a suggestion for more or almost a decade now that EPA's research could be more integrated, more coordinated within the EPA if there was a top science official. The National Academy said that the lack of a top science official is a formula for weak scientific performance of the agency. and they and others have suggested that Congress create a new position of Deputy Administrator for Science and Technology with the responsibility of coordinating and overseeing agency-wide policy, scientific policy, peer review, quality assurance. Probably the last thing we need is another position not to be confirmed by the Senate. But what does ORD have an opinion on that? Would the head of ORD become an obsolete position if Congress created a deputy at the administrator level, assuming that somebody could actually fill that position as a temporary or as a recess appointment?
Well, sir, I think this is something that's come up. It seems to be a cyclical issue that is raised. It has merit. I believe that the best I can do on a response is offer you something for the record, sir, and that's definitely in more of the political realm. So let me come back to you with a response for the record, sir.
I will yield back 31 seconds.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Mr. Cadelli for his valuable testimony, members for their questions. The members of the committee, of course, may have additional questions for you, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. I will just say that answers from the agency are obviously important to the work, but we still haven't received our QFRs back from the hearing the subcommittee held on November 17th of last year. So I'm going to ask you to kind of commit to us that within the next 2 weeks you can get those back. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments from members. The witness is excused. Thank you all for coming, and the hearing is now adjourned. All right. I just need this.